I train like every single day of my life now. I mean, I'm putting so much into it, so I'm going for gold anyway.
Eubank, Cope, Saunders not quite where he was. Oh, it's a good...
Still undefeated.
If you could describe Billy Joe Saunders in one quick sentence, how would you do so?
A sexy motherfucker.
He's ready right now. You want to fight him tonight?
Do you want to fight tonight? Would you want to go today? Would you want to go today? Would you want to go today? Would you want to go today?
He'll go. He's the wrong one to do that with.
Yeah.
I think he needs to double jab his way in.
Oh, great! Good shot from Lee. Holding on, trying to buy some seconds.
I'm ready to go. We get it down. We're ready to go now. I don't know your style.
I know you're booing me because I'll whip your fighter's ass. I've beaten enough dog meat now. Golovkin, you keep saying you want my WBO belt when I was 14 stone out of shape and wasn't in love with boxing. Then you wanted to fight me. Fight me now. Now fight me. We'll see a different story. You should be punching fresh air.
Tyson Fury's turned up here in our periphery. What's the connection there outside of being both gypsies?
We bang loads of prostitutes together.
Doing the job. I think he's definitely trying.
68-66, Canelo.
I have to come back.
You have to come back.
I have to.
So the other day, I made a video on one of my favourite fighters to watch when I was growing up, which was David Haye. And in doing so, I think that a lot of you guys are now understanding the sort of fighters that I am naturally drawn towards. I need the skill, I need the ability, but my God, I need the chaos. And that is why another man who I want to dissect the career of today is one that thrived in chaos and drama. One that at stages looked genuinely elite, and one that had the British boxing public and the world boxing public completely split down the middle. A man that controversy seemed to follow around as if it was his shadow, and a man who achieved pretty much all that he would have set out to, and in doing so, in my opinion, still walks away from boxing as an underachiever and a man that didn't fulfill the potential that I feel he had, and that man is Billy Joe Saunders.
There's people in your own country that call you an embarrassment. How does that make you feel?
Damn good. Damn good. Because I tell you what, most of the haters are going to become lovers. And you are as well one day, my friend. And stay off the pies. Because you can't get naked in front of a woman looking like that. Oh man.
Now, we haven't seen Billy Joe back in a boxing ring in over 3 years now since he took on Canelo Alvarez, and I'm really interested to hear what you guys actually made of that fight, because for me, I don't really feel like that was a fight where I was looking at it and feeling like Billy Joe Saunders was being strategically broken down. I felt that Billy Joe was actually gaining momentum in that fight after having somewhat of a slow start. And although at the time of the stoppage I did have Billy Joe Saunders down on my scorecards, I did feel like he was coming into the fight and I felt like he had won the last couple of rounds. I'm not saying he was taking over, but I do very much feel like I was not ready to write the British fighter off at that moment in time. And by the way, this for me was against a prime Canelo, and a Canelo that had recently been fighting the likes of Danny Jacobs, Sergey Kovalev, Callum Smith. The fight after that went on to stop Caleb Plant. So the class for Canelo was still there, and he was not the Canelo of today who some of us feel might be slightly declining. And despite being in with that version of Canelo, there was honestly a point around the halfway mark where I started to get a feeling, and I started to feel like this could be Billy Joe Saunders' night here, until that fateful punch.
68-66, Canelo. He's only 2 rounds up.
Saunders took an awkward step back, and now he's the right eye of Saunders is swelling up. Canelo rallying his troops here at AT&T Stadium.
He breaks down opponents and makes them weary of the shots that are coming their way.
He's like a matador. He predicted a KO in round 8 or 9, and he's and it is over. Round King with another win in the Lone Star State. When the going got tough.
And as we know now, 3 years later on from that fight, that shot may well have been the punch that ended Billy Joe Saunders' career. What we do know for sure is it is a shot that fractured his eye socket in 4 separate places, and the Brit was immediately rushed to hospital to have surgery on that eye. But where is Billy Joe Saunders now? Well, before we answer that question, I want to take it all the way back to the start of Billy Joe Saunders' roller coaster journey and recap a career that not only created excitement and drama inside of the ring, but also created the exact same amount, if not more, outside of the ring.
You pull Eddie Hearn's trousers down and nosh him off. Eddie Hearn even told you this.
Why are you pulling out your fart in the face, big boy? Hey?
Because I got injury.
Have you really?
Wanking and got injury, yeah.
Oh, at least you admit why you got it.
That's the reason why.
Billy Joe was a standout amateur who won all of his first 49 senior bouts, which by amateur standards is hugely impressive. And he even reached the qualifiers for the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, where he was part of a squad that included the likes of Tony Jeffries, David Price, probably most notably James DeGale, who went on to win a gold medal. However, for Billy Joe, it would be no such luck, as he went out in the second preliminary round to Carlos Bentu. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, which would have been a tough one for him to take, being that he had already beaten the Cuban as an amateur before. And it was shortly after this that Saunders turned professional with long-term promoter Frank Warren, who not only unveiled the signing of Billy Joe Saunders, but also of 2 other Olympian standouts in the likes of Frankie Gavin and gold medalist James DeGale. Now, to be fair to Frank Warren, I have always felt like he is a promoter that you want to be with if you're turning over and you want your career to be guided carefully and guided well. And much like he has for many, many other fighters, he navigated the first 14 fights of Billy Joe Saunders perfectly, fighting a mixture of more experienced opponents who could give him the rounds and maybe some less experienced ones who were more willing to take risks and force a fight out of the young southpaw. Now, that learning stage was really put into question as to just how far Billy Joe had come in his 15th fight when Saunders took on 12-0 Australian middleweight Jared Fletcher for the middleweight Commonwealth title, and he completely dismantled his opponent, showing both superior hand speed, footwork, ring IQ from the get-go before pulling back to counter him with a backhand and dropping his man in the second shortly before finishing him. Next up was another jump up in class for Billy Joe Saunders when he took on a fighter that I'm sure we all know in Nick Blackwell, whose record at the time was 12-1, but that one loss had come to Martin Murray, and that was a Martin Murray that went on in the following fight to challenge for a world title against Felix Sturm. This one went the distance with a 23-year-old Saunders showing both great boxing skill with a fast start, but also weathering the storm at times, showing he could take a good shot and finish strong against Blackwell with a 12-round unanimous decision win. Saunders then went on a 5-fight run in which, to me, he proved himself to be the best up-and-coming British fighter in that weight division. In the process of those 5 fights, taking 4 unbeaten fighters' scalps. Starting off with 16-0 puncher Gary Spike O'Sullivan, who Billy Joe Saunders completely outboxed over 12 rounds. And then it was on to unbeaten at the time and future world title challenger John Ryder. He was 15-0 at the time with 10 knockouts on his resume, and it was Ryder that really had given Billy Joe Saunders his toughest test to date at that point. I think that now we've pretty much seen John Ryder's career play out, what we know about him is he's teak tough and he can stand and bang with the best of them. But at that time, John Ryder hadn't really fought anyone, so Billy Joe Saunders probably was under the impression that John Ryder would not be able to jump up in levels and be able to impose those sort of tactics upon himself. But Ryder was able to, and in doing so, Billy Joe Saunders gained the invaluable experience of going the 12-round distance with such a tough and determined fighter like John Ryder. Now, I remember many people at the time feeling like this was a controversial decision. Initially, when I first watched it, I did think it was a close fight. Then I watched it back a few times and I did favour Billy Joe Saunders. I thought he did the cleaner work, although I would admit that I thought that Saunders got his tactics wrong in this one. But I do feel like these days you can't have a close fight without some people calling it a robbery. It's almost like you can't have a 115-113 scorecard anymore and it not be considered a robbery. And unfortunately for him, as John Ryder's career went on, we'd actually find out what a real robbery was when he was robbed of the win against Callum Smith, wouldn't we? And when you look back on that Callum Smith fight and compare it to the fight with Billy Joe Saunders, they're night and day. They're nowhere near as close, or should I say they're nowhere near as not as close. You know what I'm trying to get at. Anyway, Billy Joe Saunders had one more fight after that when he took on unbeaten 22-0 prospect at the time, Emmanuel Blandamura, I think it's pronounced. God knows who he is, but he got stopped in the 8th round before the big one. A huge crossroads fight between two completely different, contrasting and conflicting characters in himself and Chris Eubank Jr. Now, Eubank Jr. was 18-0 at the time, but he was vastly inexperienced in comparison to Billy Joe Saunders, in my opinion, because Eubank started boxing at an older age than Billy Joe Saunders. He had way less amateur pedigree. He had never been past the 8-round distance, and he had just never really boxed anyone. And to say these two got under each other's skin from the get-go would be an understatement.
Decent hand speed, decent power, but you know, I put him away in probably 5 or 6 rounds.
He's not even British level, is he really? He's shit. I can't describe in any other word but shit. Every time I think of shit, I think Chris Eubank, you know what I mean? When I'm having a shit, it's thinking Chris Eubank. He's terrible. It's a punchy chance, and anybody's got a punchy chance. That's the only chance I'll give him.
I'm going to give you no chance.
Alright, who have you boxed? Name someone you boxed.
Doesn't matter who I boxed.
Alright, name one undefeated fighter you boxed.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't, okay.
I know what I am.
Now you're all boxing people, then. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter.
I'm willing to die to defend my record. I said, man, just laugh like that.
Just listen.
Guys, I don't feel anything. I'm emotionless. He's the guy that gets emotional. He has all the feelings and hate. I want to kill him and smash him up and do all this stuff to him. I don't care about him. There's no bad blood on my part.
Well, you just said you're willing to die there.
He's just the guy that's keeping the belts warm for me until I'm ready to take him home on the 29th.
Now, Billy Joe actually started off as the bookmaker's favourite for this one due to the fact that obviously he did have wins over guys who we had a better understanding of where they were at in comparison to Eubank Jr. because Eubank Jr. looked great and his training footage looked great, but as I say, he hadn't really boxed anyone, and therefore the bookies went with Billy Joe Saunders. But that was until the final day, because there was a late influx of betting put onto Chris Eubank Jr., and by the time the first bell rang, Eubank Jr. had been backed into a slight favourite in this one. And despite a lot of the hype around Chris Eubank Jr. coming because of his surname, there was a little bit of validity around himself as a fighter rather than just being Chris Eubank's son. And that was from some of the sparring stories that we had heard between the likes of himself and James DeGale, between the likes of himself and George Groves. But not only that, when Carl Froch boxed George Groves in his rematch, I think, don't quote me on it, Carl could probably tell you, I think it was in front of 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium. I'm sure I've heard that somewhere. But there was obviously a lot of coverage and media hype surrounding that fight. And Sky Sports used to do a Beyond the Ropes or Behind the Ropes. It was something like that. It was a behind the scenes style episode. And in one of those episodes where Carl Froch is training for the rematch with George Groves, he spars a young Chris Eubank Jr. And Eubank Jr. looked really sharp at times in that spar, and although sparring and Froch and Billy Joe are not only completely different fighters but even box out of completely different stances, I do feel like that sparring footage was watched by so many people, and therefore a lot of people started to give Chris Eubank Jr. a real chance in this one. Now, I remember in the build-up Chris Eubank Jr. saying that he would stop Billy Joe Saunders within the first 5 rounds, but by round 7 I had already given Billy Joe 6 rounds on my scorecards, because Saunders was showing superior footwork, a much better jab, better movement and timing, all while being happy to point score on Eubank Jr. and frustrate the Brighton man, whose lack of experience at that level became quite evident in my opinion. However, you see, I say experience and not ability, as I do genuinely feel like Eubank showed ability. It's not like he didn't land on Billy Joe at all in those first 7 rounds, but as we all do, he struggled to deal with the southpaw, and it was only in the latter rounds that you started to see Eubank land more than the odd shot and actually put Saunders under a bit more sustained pressure. Now, I gave Eubank Jr. the 8th round, which made it 6-2 on my scorecards, and although probably one of the most telling shots of the fight was landed by Eubank Jr. on Billy Joe Saunders in round 9, I don't believe that you can win a fight or a round on one specific shot, and in that round, Billy Joe Saunders completely outlanded him. I gave Saunders the 10th fairly widely too. I gave Eubank Jr. the 11th round, which was a decent round for him, and round 12 saw Eubank completely run at Saunders, piling on the pressure in desperate need for a stoppage, and because of the eye-catching shots, you would give that one to Eubank Jr. too, but Saunders landed some crisp shots in that round, you know, and maybe some boxing purists could even argue a Saunders round or a drawed round, but for the sake of it, I give that round to Eubank Jr. too. Meaning at the end of the fight, I had it 8 rounds to 4 in favour of Billy Joe Saunders. The judges, however, didn't see it in the same way I did, with the bout being awarded a split decision to Saunders, with one judge scoring it to Billy Joe by 1 point, one judge scoring it to him by 2 points, and fuck knows how in my opinion, but one judge scoring it to Eubank Jr. by 3 points. So bearing in mind there was no knockdowns in that fight, that means that Judge Phil Edwards only gave Billy Joe Saunders 3 rounds out of 12, as opposed to my 8 rounds that I gave him, and even when I scored it, I was being somewhat complimentary towards Chris Eubank Jr. Now, listen, I know boxing is subjective, but that scorecard's a complete fucking disgrace, isn't it? But either way, the right man won, and the feud was, I'm going to say, briefly settled. Briefly. Well, for about 2 minutes anyway, because good old Frank Warren got these two on the same table just a couple of months later when they were both set to appear on a bill in separate tune-up fights.
I've beaten you. Chris, I've beat you, mate, yeah? You've been beat. I've beat you. Do you think you won that fight?
Of course I do.
Right. Ronnie, I respect him. You're an extremely knowledgeable man. Ronnie, did you come up to me on the night of that fight at the last show when we boxed last and said, well done, Billy Joe, you was the deserved winner?
What's that got to do with me?
I'm asking you, I'm trying to train you. Thank you very much, Ronnie.
This is not
End of story. Good deluded, you're on drugs.
You're not a better fighter.
You must be on drugs. I'm a better fighter than you because I beat you. Have you got a loss in your record? Oh, let me check one thing. 1 second, 1 minute. Hang on, right.
Given the win.
1 second. Right, Chris Eubank Jr. Win. Up, lost. Who's that? That's Billy Joe Saunders there. That's on paper, mate. Hang on, let's look at Billy Joe Saunders now, yeah? Win. Oh, what's that? Hang on, he's not there because that's still all wins. Oh, here we are. Eubanks. Oh, wins. Point decision. Look at that. That's in black and white.
Although the next big fight for Billy Joe Saunders would be a historic one, and it would be one that would go down as the first ever all-gypsy world title clash, when he would come up against fellow traveller Andy Lee for the WBO middleweight world title. Now, this fight really was an intriguing, highly skilled one, in my opinion, and one which we learnt a lot about Billy Joe. Andy Lee was notoriously a hard puncher at the weight, and a man who showed the characteristics of a wounded animal at times, probably being most dangerous when he himself was hurt. And hurt he was when Billy Joe dropped his fellow traveller twice in the 3rd round. Although Lee showed great powers of resilience and recovery to regain himself and to get himself back into the fight, winning rounds after that point. And had it not been for those couple of knockdowns, I think this is one that would have gone down as a really, really close and hard to split fight. I would have edged towards Billy Joe Saunders because for me, he landed the better and more eye-catching shots, but those two knockdowns definitely cemented the rightful winner. And in that, at the age of 26 years old, it meant that Billy Joe Saunders became the WBO middleweight world champion. Now at this time you had Golovkin, Canelo, Danny Jacobs, David Lemieux, Miguel Cotto even, all still knocking around as potential lucrative fights for Billy Joe Saunders to either defend against or for some cases even to unify against. But unfortunately for Billy Joe Saunders, he suffered multiple injury setbacks, and it was the best part of a year before we even saw him back in the ring for the first time to defend his WBO world title, when he showed up and put in, let's be honest, an underwhelming display against Arthur Akavov. And this fight was one that saw Billy Joe Saunders return to the ring and get the rounds in, and also, despite being a blink and you'll miss it moment, this was actually the first time where we were introduced to now well-known trainer Ben Davison, who cornered Billy Joe on that night at the age of just 20 years old. However, it did just kind of seem to me like Ben was more of a friend being there as someone to help Billy Joe Saunders out on the night rather than a full-time head coach. And that was probably proven to be right, because it was not long after this that Billy Joe Saunders went to the Ingle gym and linked up with trainer Dominic Ingle, son of the legendary Brendan Ingle. And the Ingle gym at that time was a really, really good one that had a great stable of fighters that included Kell Brook and Kid Galahad. Now, Dominic Ingle described Billy Joe Saunders as fat and unfit when he joined the gym, but despite it almost being 2 years since he had actually had a meaningful fight, Billy Joe did need to take that step up and really prove himself as a world champion. And that step up came immediately when he took on Southpaw Willie Monroe Jr.
We're ready to go. We're ready to go now. We're ready to go now.
Let's go.
We're ready to go now. Listen, that's all you are is a load of bums coming over and you're going to get dealt with.
Yeah, okay.
Mate, I don't know who you're standing there for. Boom, boom, boom.
Go, guys.
Hold tight, listen, this is... Hold tight, he's right. There you go, take that. Smell him! Now you smell it! See you later, shitty ass. Next time, bring your mum here as well, you walking out. Bring your mum here, and we'll fuck her like a bitch. Golovkin battered him! Your arm is gone!
Monroe Jr. had lost to Golovkin in 5 rounds, but he had just come off a win against the tough and durable Gabe Rosado, and if Billy Joe could better the result of Golovkin, then this could send out a message to the division. Better the decision, he did not though, after Billy Joe Saunders won the fight on points. It was a fairly one-sided fight, in my opinion, but I think that we'd all say Willie Monroe Jr. gave Billy Joe Saunders more problems than we expected him to be able to give him. And it was at this point when you were kind of wondering, were Billy Joe Saunders' best days already behind him, you know? Were his best performances those ones that we saw when he was elevating himself through the British scene, or potentially during that memorable night when he won his world title off of Andy Lee? But then came the fight that saw Billy Joe Saunders put in one of the best ever away performances from a British fighter on foreign soil, in my opinion, when he took on David Lemieux in his backyard of Canada. Now, Lemieux was known as a very hard hitter with 24 stoppages in his first 25 fights. He did then take a couple of losses, but then he went on a 9-fight winning streak, beating highly rated at the time Hassan and Dan before landing the shot against Golovkin, and that was a fight that he was stopped within 8 rounds. But he was able to land plenty of shots on Gennady Golovkin, but in doing so, it was more something that showed us just how tough Gennady Golovkin was, because he ate pretty much all of David Lemieux's shots, and he outlanded him 3-1, 4-1, something like that. Ultimately, David Lemieux wasn't really able to put a dent in Golovkin, but being that the loss to Golovkin was in a unification bout, 4 wins in a row after that one put Lemieux back as a highly ranked contender, and therefore it was ordered as a mandatory by the WBO, set to take place in Quebec, Lemieux's home city. Now, I've spoken before about short shelf life fighters and on their night fighters, and it's all very hypothetical, I get this, but call me crazy, and I'm sure you lot will say I am, but that version of Billy Joe Saunders that was in the ring that night against David Lemieux, I feel would have had a really, really good chance of beating that version of Golovkin that was around at the exact same time. He was preparing for his rematch with Saul Canelo Alvarez, because Billy Joe was just brilliant this night, man. His footwork, his hand speed, his boxing IQ were all exquisite and at levels that we had just not seen before. And listen, the word schooling is thrown around too much in boxing, but this fight was a complete schooling. Lemieux might have taken a couple of losses earlier on in his career, but in his last loss, that was at world level against one of the most feared men in the sport in Triple G. And to go to a puncher's backyard and win every single second of every single round, hitting him from all angles, jabbing at will, yet at the same time putting sharp combos together en route to completely breaking the heart of the man in front of you, is not something that is easily done. And that is something that Billy Joe did perfectly on the night. And upon doing so, the appetite was now there. Despite the fact that we had seen underwhelming performances from Billy Joe Saunders, I think we as the boxing public were sold at this point, and we very much now wanted to see him in with the likes of Canelo and of Triple G. And stylistically, I honestly believe that this version of Billy Joe Saunders, with that Ingle style, twitchy, elusive, fast, fit, most importantly, would have potentially been a nightmare for Canelo and for Golovkin at that time. And it's the Golovkin fight that I'm always fascinated by. I'm sure there would have been a possibility that Golovkin was able to just walk down Billy Joe Saunders, take his shots to land his own. But when you look, for example, at the struggles that Golovkin had against Danny Jacobs, albeit in victory, I just really feel like that version of Billy Joe not only clearly felt that he had the beating of Golovkin, but could actually have formulated a game plan to outpoint Triple G. And for all of you out there saying that it's just a guarantee that Golovkin would have walked through Billy Joe Saunders and would have knocked out Billy Joe Saunders, how can you guarantee that when you had never seen that done to Billy Joe Saunders? And you might then go and point to the Canelo fight, because what I'll remind you is Billy Joe Saunders has never been off his feet in a fight before. He has never been dropped. And even when Canelo did that shot that did damage to his face and almost caved in a side of his face, look at how Billy Joe Saunders reacted. He didn't go down to the canvas. He didn't take a knee. He carried on fighting through until his corner pulled him out. But with Golovkin and Canelo set to fight each other next, it would only be logical for Billy Joe to now take on the next best men in the division. However, a couple of injuries again then unfortunately took place before Billy Joe Saunders signing to fight unbeaten at the time Demetrius Andrade. And I was so excited for this one, man. They even had a press conference.
I just want to point out one thing. I don't know if this man's come as Karate Kid today or Papa Smurf.
But unfortunately, this fight did not take place, as one of many upcoming controversies hit when Billy Joe Saunders tested positive for a banned substance in oxylothrine. Now, this one's a really tricky one. I know people will be very quick to just call him a drug cheat and whatnot, but Billy Joe Saunders did have an immediate excuse as to why this oxylothrine was in his system, and that was due to a nasal spray that he was able to provide, and it was tested and showed that that nasal spray did contain oxylothrine. And had the fight been set to take place in the UK, then Billy Joe Saunders wouldn't have actually tested positive, because in the UK you are not only allowed oxylothrine in your system on the day or night of the fight. However, you can have it in your system during your training camp. I know, it's hard to get our head around any of this bollocks, isn't it? Either way, the fight was off, is what I'm trying to get at, and Billy Joe Saunders would once again find himself on the sidelines for the best part of a year. Now, it really is during times of inactivity when you find out a lot more about how a fighter is and what sort of mindset a fighter has. You can look at the likes of Floyd Mayweather, and despite, you know, flaunting a life of luxury on social media and whatnot, Floyd Mayweather's still in the gym pretty much every day. He still spars most weeks as well. But then you have fighters like Billy Joe Saunders. So there's a saying, isn't there? And that is that the devil makes work for idle hands. And it was around this time, especially around the lockdown period, that Billy Joe Saunders started to find himself in multiple controversial incidents. And this really was a period of time that split public opinion on Billy Joe Saunders. And I would even go as far to say turned many people against Billy Joe Saunders.
Stand the vehicle. Stand the vehicle.
I'm looking for garage to get it clean.
Have you got a license for this? Yeah. Is this insured? Yeah. Okay, 1 second. Put that window down, please. Do you have any weapons at all on you? All right. Could you lift your top up? Undo your belt. Because we've had a call to say this vehicle's carrying a weapon. Can you undo your trousers, please? Now, do not make any sudden movements. Pull your trousers down. Do not make any sudden movements. Take the t-shirt off. Do not make no sudden movements.
I've got crack here. Yeah, if you want it, I'll give it to you.
Yeah? Yeah.
I'm going to give you 150 quid's worth. Can you sing?
Hey?
Can you sing?
Not very well.
I'll have to give you 150 quid's worth. We'll him off at the side there. Now for it.
Have you given it first, yeah?
He's a paedophile. Punch him in the face and I'm going to give you 150 quid's worth. Punch him in the face. Go on, I'm going to give you it right now. Punch him, 200. Go on, he's a paedophile. Punch him.
I heard you're a paedophile, mate. I heard you're a paedophile. I'm not
Oh.
Hang on, mate.
Oh, he's not a paedophile.
Sorry, mate, I mixed up with somebody. Sorry, I heard you're a pedo. Sorry, sweetheart. Sorry, I heard you're a paedophile.
Now, these two moments that you've just seen were actually put up, I believe, by either Billy Joe Saunders himself or someone from Team Saunders. And therefore, you can understand why the public was so frustrated with him. Because regardless of how you see it from a human aspect, after beating David Lemieux in the way he did and then testing positive for a banned substance, I think that boxing fans really just wanted to see Billy Joe Saunders get on the straight and narrow, get his head down and sort his shit out. And after a year out the ring, Billy Joe Saunders did finally return when he came back nearly 20 pounds heavier than he had boxed David Lemieux at on the undercard of Carl Frampton against Josh Warrington when he boxed Charles Adamu. And I think this was just more of a dusting off the cobweb style fight because Billy Joe Saunders understood that he could not get back down to 160 pounds and therefore it'd be good to take a fight in the interim while he lost the weight. But maybe somewhere along the lines, Billy Joe understood that, you know what, probably never going to be able to make 160 anymore, and therefore he made the decision to move up to super middleweight. And being that he was a former WBO champion and his promoter Frank Warren at the time had close ties with the WBO, he was able to secure himself an immediate title shot for a vacant super middleweight WBO world title against the world famous Shefat Asufi. Me neither. But despite Asufi being nowhere near the caliber, in my opinion, of a David Lemieux, it did seem like the fast-moving, quick-flowing version of Billy Joe Saunders was back, and that the move up in weight wasn't one that had him seeming vulnerable. Billy Joe looked good in this one, putting on a display of great boxing and even a bit of showmanship too. And then, in a really surprising turn of events, Billy Joe Saunders left promoter Frank Warren. I believe it was amicable amicably. I don't think they actually fell out, but it did surprise me because obviously Frank Warren was with Billy Joe Saunders right from the start. He went through his whole career with him, the ups, the downs, the highs, the lows, the controversies, and everything else that came with it. However, I did understand the move because Billy Joe Saunders moved to Matchroom and therefore became part of Eddie Hearn's stable. And Matchroom were very much dominant at the time, especially on the global scene where they were working with the likes of Golovkin and with the likes of Canelo Alvarez. So for Billy Joe Saunders, maybe the route to one of these huge paydays and massive fights would be easier guided by Eddie Hearn. And speaking of mega fights, you really don't get much bigger than KSI against Logan Paul, do ya? Because that is the card that Billy Joe Saunders made his Matchroom debut on. He fought at the time an unbeaten fighter in Marcelo Corcerez, who you can only say proved to be a harder night's work for Billy Joe than maybe he had anticipated. And with the scorecards being tight, Billy Joe knew that he had to throw the kitchen sink at this man in the final few rounds, ultimately forcing a stoppage in the 11th. And then the pandemic hit, and this was a really hard time for all of us. We honestly didn't know what to do. We were either baking cakes, doing arts and crafts, queuing up for toilet roll, binge watching Tiger King, or God knows what else. But for Billy Joe Saunders, this was a time when he started to land himself in some real hot water.
Just for all you dads, husbands, if you've got girlfriends, etc. Obviously this COVID-19 is getting very serious and we're isolated away in, very tight spaces. So right, if your old woman's giving you a little bit of mouth, you try to be patient, you try to be calm, cool, but out of the 7th day, you're just about to explode. All of a sudden she's coming at you now, spitting a bit of venom in your face, ready to say something. You may have left the dishes out, you may have, I don't know what you've done, but you've upset her. So as she comes in, she's coming at you and you've lost it, just keep it safe with the hands. So as she comes in, she's just about to say something, all of a sudden you explode, BAM! On the chin. Yeah, so you've hit her on the chin. At this time, she may flash and see white thinking, what's just happened? Has he done it? I can't believe this. Whoa, what's happened? She don't know what's happened. She's in a state of horror at the minute. She don't know what's gone on. And all of a sudden, you just dip down on that knee, whip, and spring up. So you finish her off. Bam! That should do the trick.
Now, Saunders was fined £15,000 from the British Boxing Board of Control for this video, and I do completely get it. This is a video that could obviously be taken in a way which I don't think it was actually intended. It could bring up trauma for victims of domestic abuse, and whether you like it or not, you do have to accept that being a world champion, you are going to be considered a role model by plenty of younger people. However, at the same time, probably being someone that has somewhat of a dark sense of humour and has grown up around a lot of travellers and things like that, I wasn't really as shocked as the general public when I saw that clip of Billy Joe Saunders. Like, I've lived my whole life in Epsom, right, which is a place where they do once a year the Epsom Derby. That's a very famous horse racing event, and that means that once a year the gypsy community completely congregate upon Epsom, but many never leave, do you know what I mean? It's a very heavily populated traveller area. So I've grown up around a lot of gypsies and obviously being in the boxing gyms and stuff like that myself, and therefore I kind of understand the sort of dark sense of humour and the banter that a lot of these boys will have. However, if you hadn't come into contact with a lot of people from the travelling community and whatnot, and you hadn't met people like Billy Joe Saunders, then I can understand why you would find clips like this completely shocking and why it would outrage you. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Like, I definitely do understand that Billy Joe Saunders was wrong to post his clip. I'm just saying I understand the mindset of someone like a Billy Joe Saunders, having grown up around a lot of people like that. Either way, thanks to Eddie Hearn putting on shows behind closed doors, Billy Joe Saunders' period of inactivity during that lockdown pandemic period didn't last for too long. When he fought behind closed doors around 8 months after the start of the UK restrictions, when he took on former world title challenger Martin Murray. Now, Murray was 38 years old by this point with 5 losses on his record, but many would argue only 2 of those losses were fair ones, because Murray lost controversial decisions a couple of times for world titles, and despite being past his best, this wasn't the worst of opponents in my opinion. But once Billy Joe Saunders came through this one, we finally got the answers to our questions as to would Billy Joe be able to hang it at world level when the fight was signed between himself and Saul Canelo Alvarez. I think it's very fair to say that Billy Joe got under Canelo's skin in the build-up to this one, and I think it's fair to say that is exactly what Billy Joe intended to do. I really feel like he wanted Canelo to be less calculated and more emotional in this fight, and therefore potentially box with less strategy, which would enable Billy Joe Saunders to pop that jab, move those feet, and try and walk Canelo onto shots coming forward as he did with David Lemieux. And despite coming through in victory, Canelo Alvarez did really find it hard when he boxed Erislandy Lara, and at the time that was seen as a really controversial decision. And being that Lara was a southpaw, Billy Joe Saunders would have seen that. And I don't even think it's just the fact that Lara was a southpaw. I think that Billy Joe would have seen enough moments from Canelo's career where he came out second best when it came to footwork, when it came to timing, albeit most of these being in fights that he was eventually victorious in. However, from the first bell, you could see that Canelo had made clear improvements from the last time he fought a southpaw, and he didn't find Billy Joe as elusive as he found Lara. But after what I felt was a very hesitant first few rounds from Saunders, I really felt like Billy Joe started to come into the fight and started winning rounds, and I saw it as very nip and tuck, you know, and I suspected that Canelo was up without knowing the actual scorecards, but this was one where Billy Joe was gaining momentum and could get really close down the stretch. But in the 8th round, Canelo lands that shot, and that was a shot that not only had he been setting up, but he had already been attempting multiple times throughout the fight. Now, Billy Joe Saunders did stay on his feet and make it through the rest of the round, but he could not come out of his corner for the next round, and therefore, Canelo won that one via stoppage. And let's be honest, man, despite Billy Joe Saunders being given a lot of stick, especially when the footage re-emerged of him criticising Daniel Dubois for apparently quitting during his fight with Joe Joyce, we've got to understand that if Billy Joe had have come back out and his corner had have allowed him to continue, he would have risked going blind. He would have definitely been badly beaten up. He'd have been fighting with impaired vision, and ultimately the fight wouldn't have even been that interesting. He'd have either got stopped straight away or spent the next 15 odd minutes running and boxing on the back foot. The thing is, right, there's 2 ways that you can look at it. For me, you can look at it and say that that was a freak shot, because we've seen Canelo land that shot on many opponents before, and it hasn't broken their eye socket in 4 different places, has it? Or you can draw back to what I just referenced, and that is the fact that Canelo Alvarez was setting up and attempting that shot for multiple rounds before he eventually landed it, meaning that it was probably inevitable that Canelo was going to land that shot, whether or not it was going to do that sort of damage that it did to Billy Joe. It's a really hard one for me, because I want to make a case for Billy Joe Saunders being one of Canelo's toughest fights, but at the same time, there's a lot of what-ifs in me doing so. If that shot hadn't have landed, would Billy Joe have continued to bring the fight closer on the scorecards? Would Canelo have been happy with a points victory, or would he have seeked a late stoppage like he did in his fight before against Kovalev? And in doing so, would that have allowed a smart, natural counterpuncher like Billy Joe Saunders to be able to counter Canelo as he came in aggressive? Who knows? And I suppose we never will know. But as of right now, that is the last time that we have seen Billy Joe Saunders in a boxing ring. And I do think it's sad, because at the age of 35 now, and having not fought in so long, it's very, very hard to imagine we're ever going to see the best of Billy Joe Saunders, even if he was to come back. And I really do feel like a similar sort of situation played out with Billy Joe Saunders' career to the likes of David Haye, James DeGale, Kell Brook, and that is that the quality and the ability that they had doesn't actually match their resume or the way that they're regarded now their careers are done. Had Billy Joe Saunders not failed that drug test after the David Lemieux fight, and had he been able to secure himself the big fights against top level opposition, then I believe that maybe the history books would be kinder to Billy Joe Saunders, and he would go down in those history books as one of our higher regarded world champions. Now, there is talk that seems to pop up every couple of months that Billy Joe Saunders might be coming back, but obviously at the same time we're seeing pictures of him and he looks completely out of shape and things like that. We don't know whether he's training. If he is training, he's definitely keeping it on the sly because we're not seeing all that much. But if there's any time to come back out of, let's say, retirement, which is not what Billy Joe Saunders has actually ever even done, then now's the time. With Riyadh season in boxing, if you're anywhere near an age that you can still compete, then you should be looking to come back right now. And if Mike Tyson can get in a ring, Billy Joe Saunders can definitely get in a ring. But for me, there's only one fight out there if Billy Joe Saunders is to come back. So Billy, if you're watching this right now, here's what you need to do. Get Greg Marriott back on board, get the weight down, take a fight as soon as you can against an absolute shitter and just try and get some rounds in and get that as soon as possible while you're losing the weight and while you're bringing it back down. Even if it means coming back at cruiserweight, coming back at light heavyweight at a push, get that weight down, and in the process of doing that, we will see the fight play out between Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. And as much as I admit that I do feel like that's a close fight, I'm probably at this early stage edging towards Chris Eubank Jr. And if he comes through that one, he's been calling your name, he's been saying stuff about you, and potentially you might feel like he's been calling your name because he feels that you are now in a physical position where you're not able to come back to boxing. But if you were to come back with the charisma that Billy Joe Saunders has and with the ability that he very, very clearly has, that fight, if Eubank Jr. beats Conor Benn, could be an absolute huge domestic dust-up. And if not, I'm sure that Turki Al Sheikh would find other opponents for you on Riyadh season cards. So if it was down to me, I would love to see Billy Joe Saunders back in a boxing ring, because I truly don't think that his career got the respect that maybe it deserved, and he wasn't able to feel the potential that I definitely do feel that he had. But either way, I'm really, really interested to hear your lot's takes on this one. And by the way, a lot of time and effort has gone into this video, as it does all the videos. A lot of you guys are hitting the subscribe button, but I checked the analytics the other day and still around 75% of you guys that watch my channel aren't subscribed. It's one click of a button for you, but it makes it so much easier for me to be able to put the time and effort into banging out this sort of content for you, because I am really busy. So please, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like button. It's good for the algorithm. It gets these videos out there. Let me know who you would like to hear me talk about next time out when I do one of these style videos, and I will see you all in the next one.